Isabella Moretti's water broke at 3 a.m., alone in a hospital room that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. 7 months pregnant, bleeding, terrified. And her husband wouldn't answer his phone. Adrian Vance, the most powerful man in the city, the man who'd sworn to protect her, was 40 blocks away in his mistress's penthouse, his phone buzzing ignored on silk sheets. In that sterile room, watching her own blood seep through expensive cotton, Isabella Moretti made a decision that would destroy an empire. But first, she had to survive the night. If you want to see how a forgotten wife becomes the architect of her own revenge, stay until the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Isabella's story reaches. The thing about power, Isabella would later reflect, is that it makes men stupid. Adrian Vance had built an empire on fear, strategy, and an almost supernatural ability to predict his enemies' moves. He could smell betrayal 3 deals before it manifested. He'd negotiated treaties between families that had been killing each other for generations. He'd turned a small-time protection racket into a multi-billion-dollar operation that touched everything from real estate to shipping, from city contracts to offshore accounts, so complex they required 3 lawyers just to explain them. But he couldn't hear his wife screaming. Isabella had known what Adrian was when she married him. Everyone did. Adrian Vance wasn't a man who hid his nature behind legitimacy. He wore his power like other men wore cologne, heavy and unmistakable. At 23, she'd been dazzled by it. The daughter of a failed businessman who'd drunk himself to death, she'd grown up watching her mother clean houses to keep food on their table. Adrian had seemed like salvation wrapped in Italian suits and dangerous smiles. He'd courted her like she was precious, flowers every day, drivers who appeared whenever she needed to go anywhere. He'd listened when she talked about the books she loved, the degree in literature she'd had to abandon when her father's debts came due. He'd made her feel seen in a way no one ever had. The wedding had been spectacular. 300 guests, champagne that cost more per bottle than her mother's monthly rent, a dress that had required 6 fittings and made her look like something out of a fairy tale. Adrian had written his own vows, standing there in front of his entire organization, and promised to cherish her above all things. For exactly 11 months, he'd kept that promise. Then Sofia Castellano had walked into his office to discuss a merger between her family's operations and his, and everything had changed. Isabella had seen it happening. She wasn't naive, despite what Adrian seemed to think. She'd noticed the late meetings, the new cologne, the way his phone was suddenly password protected. She'd noticed how he looked at Sofia at the charity gala, the same way he'd once looked at her. But she'd been pregnant by then, 5 months along, and she'd told herself it would pass. Men like Adrian, they had appetites. Sofia was exciting, powerful in her own right, someone who spoke his language of violence and territory. It would burn hot and fade fast. He'd come back to his wife, to his child. She'd been so catastrophically wrong. The cramping had started during dinner, a dinner she'd eaten alone in a dining room designed to seat 20. Sharp, vicious pains that stole her breath and made her drop her fork with a clatter that echoed through the empty house. Mrs. Vance? Maria, the housekeeper, had appeared in the doorway, her weathered face creasing with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Isabella had started to say, and then the second cramp hit, harder than the first, and she'd felt something warm and wrong between her legs. The car ride to the hospital existed in her memory as a blur of pain and terror. Maria holding her hand, speaking rapid Spanish that Isabella's fear-fogged brain couldn't translate. The driver, Marcus, she thought, or maybe Michael, running every red light between the estate and St. Catherine's Medical Center. The emergency room had been chaos. Nurses appearing with a wheelchair, questions she couldn't answer about her medical history, about allergies, about who to contact. She'd given them Adrian's number 3 times, called him herself twice, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. Voicemail, every single time. They'd admitted her to the private maternity wing, the floor that Adrian's money had essentially purchased for his wife's use. A corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, artwork on the walls, a couch that converted to a bed for the husband who wasn't there. Dr. Sarah Chen had been gentle but direct. "You're experiencing what we call a threatened miscarriage, Mrs. Vance. The bleeding, the cramping, your body is under extreme stress. We're going to monitor you closely, but I need you to understand that you're only 28 weeks. If we can't stop the labor, your daughter will be severely premature." "What do I need to do?" Isabella had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rest. Stay calm. Let us take care of you." Dr. Chen had paused, her eyes flicking to the empty chair beside the bed. "Is there anyone we can call? Your husband—" "He's not answering," Isabella had said, and hated how small her voice sounded. That had been 6 hours ago. Now, at 3 a.m., Isabella lay in the darkness and listened to the machines monitoring her daughter's heartbeat. Strong and steady, Dr. Chen had said. A fighter. Isabella had placed her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the flutter of movement, and tried to feel grateful instead of terrified. Her phone sat on the table beside her, screen dark, silent. 40 blocks north, in a penthouse apartment that Sophia had purchased with family money and decorated with the kind of aggressive minimalism that announced wealth without warmth, Adrian Vance was discovering what it felt like to be truly comfortable. "Stop thinking about business," Sophia murmured against his neck, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "You're here. Be here." Adrian smiled, pulling her closer. This was what he'd been missing, someone who understood him, someone who didn't need protecting, who didn't look at him with that mixture of fear and worship that Isabella had perfected. Sophia was his equal. She ran her family's operations with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to his own. When they talked, it was strategy and territory, power and leverage. When they fucked, it was hungry and competitive and electric. Isabella was sweet, beautiful in a delicate way that had once appealed to him. But she was also soft, gentle, completely unsuited for his world, despite her best attempts to adapt. She wanted book clubs and charity lunches and conversations about curtains. She wanted him to be something he wasn't, something tame and domestic and safe. His phone buzzed for what felt like the 100th time that night, vibrating against the nightstand. He didn't even glance at it. "Popular tonight," Sophia said, amusement in her voice. "It can wait," Adrian said, and kissed her to prove it. In her hospital room, Isabella watched the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold. She'd spent the night making lists in her head, all the moments that should have warned her, all the signs she'd ignored because she'd wanted so desperately to believe in the man Adrian had pretended to be. The way he'd started comparing her to other women. "Sophia knows how to handle herself at these events, Isabella. Maybe you should watch how she works a room." The way he'd stopped asking about her day, her thoughts, her feelings. The way he'd moved her things from the master bedroom to a guest suite without discussion, claiming he needed the space to work, to think, to breathe without her constant presence suffocating him. The way he'd looked at her growing belly with something that might have been disappointment or resentment or simple indifference. She told herself it was the stress of his business, the pressure of running an organization where weakness meant death. She'd convinced herself that once the baby came, everything would change. He'd hold his daughter and remember why he'd married her, what he'd promised, who they were supposed to be together. But he hadn't come. Even now, even when she and their child were in danger, he hadn't come. At 7 a.m., Maria appeared in the doorway carrying a small bag. "I brought you some things from the house," she said quietly. "Clothes, your phone charger, your book." "Thank you, Maria." Isabella's throat was tight. "Has there been any word from—" "No, Mrs. Vance, I'm sorry." Isabella nodded, unsurprised. She'd stopped crying somewhere around 5 a.m. Now she just felt empty, hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left only the shell. "The doctor said you need to stay calm," Maria continued, setting the bag down and taking Isabella's hand. Her fingers were warm and calloused, real in a way nothing else felt in that moment. "I know this is hard, but your baby needs you strong." "I don't feel strong," Isabella whispered. "Strength isn't about feeling, child. It's about choosing. Every single day you choose to survive." Maria squeezed her hand. "And you will. I see it in you." At 9 a.m., Adrian finally woke up. Sophia was already gone, an early meeting with her uncle about territorial disputes in the Port District. His phone screen was lit up with notifications. 23 missed calls, 15 text messages, all from numbers he didn't recognize except for Maria's. He frowned, scrolling through them. Maria never called unless it was important. With a sigh, he dialed her back. Mr. Vance. Her voice was ice. Your wife is in the hospital. She's been there since 8 o'clock last night. She could lose the baby. I've been trying to reach you for hours. The words took a moment to register. When they did, Adrian felt something cold slide through his chest. What hospital? St. Catherine's. Private maternity wing. Where else would your pregnant wife be? He was already moving, grabbing clothes, his mind shifting into crisis mode. Is the baby? She's stable, for now. The doctors managed to stop the labor, but she's on strict bed rest. She needs her husband, Mr. Vance. The reproach in Maria's voice was unmistakable. Adrian chose to ignore it. I'm on my way. Tell her I'm on my way. He arrived at the hospital at 10:15 a.m., striding through the halls with the confidence of a man who owned everything he touched. The nurses recognized him, stepped aside, murmured greetings that he didn't acknowledge. Isabella's room was at the end of the hall. He pushed through the door, already preparing his apology, his explanation, the charm that had always worked before. She was sitting up in bed, pale and drawn, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She'd lost weight despite the pregnancy. Her face was gaunt, her collarbones too prominent. When had that happened? When had she started looking like this? Isabella, he began. I'm so sorry. I was in a meeting, my phone died. I didn't realize. Stop, she said quietly. He stopped. There was something in her voice he'd never heard before, something flat and final. Your phone wasn't dead, she continued in that same eerily calm voice. You had it with you. You saw the calls. You chose not to answer. That's not... I didn't know it was serious. I called you 12 times, Adrian. Maria called you 11 more. The hospital called 4 times. She looked at him directly, and her eyes were different, harder. You knew. You just didn't care. He moved closer to the bed, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away. I'm here now, he said, trying for gentle, for caring. Let me make this right. Tell me what you need. What I need, Isabella said slowly, is for you to be honest, just once. Where were you last night? The question hung in the air between them. Adrian could have lied. He was good at lying. But something in Isabella's expression told him she already knew that this was a test he'd already failed. I was with Sophia, he said. But Isabella, it's not what you think. You were with your mistress while your wife and daughter almost died. She said it like she was reading from a grocery list. No emotion, no tears. That's exactly what I think it is. The business with the Castellanos is complicated. Sophia and I were working on, at 3 a.m? She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. In her apartment? Are you really going to insult me like this? Adrian felt his temper flare. This was the problem with Isabella. She didn't understand his world, the compromises it required, the alliances that needed to be maintained. You want me to apologize for keeping this family safe? For doing what needs to be done to maintain our position? I want you, Isabella said clearly, to admit that you don't love me anymore. If you ever did. The words should have been easy to say. They weren't. Isabella. It's a simple question, Adrian. Do you love me? He looked at his wife, this woman he'd married because she was beautiful and sweet and so completely unlike the violent world he inhabited, this woman who'd never asked for anything except his presence, his attention, his heart, and he felt nothing. Nothing except impatience and the desire to be somewhere else, anywhere else. His silence was answer enough. Isabella nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she'd long suspected. Thank you for that, at least. For not lying about this one thing. The baby, he started, is mine, my daughter, my responsibility. She placed both hands on her belly, protective and possessive. You made your choice last night. You chose Sophia over us. That's fine. That's your right. But don't pretend now that you care. Don't stand there and lie to my face about wanting to be a father when you couldn't be bothered to answer the phone while your child was fighting to survive. You're being dramatic, Adrian said, frustration bleeding into his voice. You're upset, you're scared, I understand that. But this emotional reaction isn't helpful to anyone. Get out, he blinked. What? Get out. Isabella's voice was still calm, still flat, but there was steel underneath it. Leave. Go back to Sophia. Go back to your empire. But don't stand there and pretend you're here for me. You're here because Maria called and you felt obligated. You're here because it looks bad if you're not. You're here for you, Adrian, not for me, not for our daughter. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. She turned her face away from him, toward the window and the city beyond. Please leave. Adrian stood there caught between anger and something that might have been guilt if he let himself feel it. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He'd come here to fix things, to smooth them over, to make Isabella understand. But she wouldn't even look at him. Fine, he said coldly. When you're ready to be reasonable, call me. He walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded, to Isabella's ears, like a gunshot. She didn't cry. Not yet. She'd saved the tears for later, for the dark hours when she was alone and the weight of everything crashed down on her. Right now, she needed to think. Doctor. Chen came in at noon, her expression cautiously optimistic. The bleeding has stopped. Your daughter's heartbeat is strong. If we can keep things stable for another week, 2 weeks, we'll be in much better shape. What do I need to do? Isabella asked. Bed rest. Minimum stress. We'll monitor you closely, but Mrs. Vance, you need to take care of yourself. Your blood pressure is elevated. Your stress hormones are through the roof. Whatever's causing that, you need to eliminate it. Isabella thought about Adrian, about the mansion that had never felt like home, about the life she'd been living in the shadow of his indifference. I understand, she said. She stayed in the hospital for 5 more days. Adrian came twice more, both visits brief and awkward, full of the kind of stilted conversation people have when they're pretending to care. He brought flowers that the nurses arranged in vases. He sat in the chair beside her bed and talked about business dealings she didn't understand, clearly uncomfortable with the silence, with her lack of response. Sophia called him on the 3rd visit. Isabella heard her voice through the phone, bright, demanding, impatient. Adrian excused himself and left. He didn't come back. On the 6th day, Dr. Chen discharged her with strict instructions. You're going home, but this isn't over. Bed rest means bed rest. No stress, no heavy lifting, no trying to be a hero. Your job for the next 2 months is to stay horizontal and grow that baby. I understand, Isabella said. Marcus drove her home. The mansion rose before her, all glass and steel and cold modern architecture that Adrian had chosen because it made a statement. Isabella had always hated it. Too big, too empty, too much like a museum where she was one of the exhibits. Maria met her at the door, fussing and hovering. I've prepared the guest suite for you. Fresh sheets, everything you need. You'll rest, you'll eat, you'll get strong again. Thank you, Maria. Isabella let herself be led upstairs, let Maria help her into bed, accepted the tea and toast without argument. When Maria finally left, Isabella lay in the silence and tried to remember who she'd been before Adrian. The girl who'd loved books and words, who'd dreamed of teaching literature, of making a difference in small, quiet ways. The girl who'd been smart and capable and brave enough to work 3 jobs to keep her mother housed and fed after her father's death. That girl wouldn't have stayed in a marriage where she was invisible. That girl wouldn't have accepted neglect and infidelity and casual cruelty as the price of security. That girl had disappeared somewhere along the way, buried under expensive clothes and social obligations, and the constant effort of trying to be what Adrian wanted while knowing she'd never be enough. Isabella placed her hand on her belly, felt her daughter move. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I brought you into this. The baby kicked, strong and insistent. You deserve better, Isabella continued. You deserve a mother who's strong enough to protect you, to choose you first. Another kick, almost like agreement. Isabella closed her eyes and made a promise. Not to Adrian, not to the life she'd been living, to her daughter, to herself, to the woman she'd once been and might be again. She would survive this, and when she was strong enough, when her daughter was safe, she would leave. Not dramatically, not with confrontation or ultimatums or attempts to change Adrian's mind. She would simply vanish. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in months, Isabella felt something that might have been hope. That night, while Adrian was at a strategy meeting that would run until dawn, Isabella opened her laptop. She'd barely used it in the last year. Adrian preferred she stay disconnected from his business, and she'd had nothing of her own to work on. But muscle memory returned as she navigated to her bank accounts. The joint account held millions. Money from Adrian's operations, money that could be traced, money that would set off alarms if she touched it. But there was another account, the one her mother had left her when she died, 2 years into Isabella's marriage. It wasn't much. $60,000 that her mother had saved penny by penny over 40 years. Isabella had never touched it, had barely thought about it. She'd been so wrapped up in being Mrs. Adrian Vance that her own money had seemed irrelevant. Now, looking at that balance, she saw a possibility. $60,000 was enough to disappear, to start over, to become someone new. She spent the next 3 weeks planning. It was delicate work, requiring patience and subtlety and the kind of strategic thinking she'd thought she'd lost. But it turned out that being married to a crime boss had taught her more than she'd realized about covering tracks and planning escapes. She started small. A new email address created on a burner phone she'd asked Maria to pick up. A storage unit, rented under a fake name in a neighborhood far from anywhere Adrian's organization operated. Slowly, carefully, she moved things there. Documents, photographs, her mother's jewelry, the few possessions that had been hers before the marriage. Maria knew something was happening. Isabella could see it in the way the housekeeper watched her, concerned but not questioning. One afternoon, Maria brought her tea and said quietly, "If you need help, child, you only have to ask." Isabella had taken her hand, squeezed it gently. "When I go," she'd said, "I need you to forget everything you know about where I might be." Maria's eyes had filled with tears. "I understand. And I need you to wait 3 days before you tell him I'm gone. Can you do that?" 3 days, Maria had agreed. "But Isabella, are you sure? If he finds out what you're planning, he won't find out because he doesn't see me anymore. I've become invisible." Isabella had smiled, bitter and bright. "That's the gift he gave me. The gift I'm finally going to use." At 32 weeks, Isabella went into labor. It happened fast, too fast for the careful plan she'd been constructing. One moment she was resting in bed, the next she was on the floor, water broken, contractions tearing through her with vicious intensity. "Maria!" she'd screamed. "Maria, help!" The housekeeper had appeared within seconds, already on the phone with 911. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. They'd loaded Isabella onto a stretcher, Maria climbing in beside her, holding her hand as they raced toward the hospital. "Call Adrian," Isabella had gasped between contractions. "Please, Maria, he should know." Maria had called, left 4 voicemails, sent 6 texts. He hadn't answered. He was with Sophia. Again. Always. Isabella's daughter was born at 11:47 p.m., tiny and furious, her cry filling the delivery room with fierce indignation at being forced into the world too soon. 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Lungs that needed help but were functional. A body that would require weeks in the NECU, but had, against all odds, survived. "She's perfect, doctor," Chen had said, placing the impossibly small bundle on Isabella's chest for 30 precious seconds before the NICU team took her away for treatment. "You did it, Mrs. Vance. You brought her through." Isabella had looked at her daughter, red-faced and tiny, her eyes squeezed shut, her miniature fists waving, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not break, open. Love, ferocious and absolute and terrifying in its intensity. "Lena," she'd whispered. "Your name is Lena." It meant light. It meant strength. It meant everything Isabella wanted her daughter to be. Adrian arrived 2 hours later, stepping into the recovery room where Isabella lay exhausted and shaking. He looked harried, annoyed at being pulled away from whatever he'd been doing. "Where's the baby?" he asked. "In ICU," Isabella said flatly. "She's premature. They're monitoring her." "Is she going to be okay?" "They think so. She's strong." Adrian nodded, already checking his phone. "That's good. That's good." He glanced at Isabella, seemed to register her expression for the first time. "You did well. She'll be fine." "You weren't here." "I told you I was in a meeting. This merger with the Castellanos." "You were with Sophia," Isabella interrupted. "Don't lie to me. Not now. Not after everything." Adrian's jaw tightened. You don't understand the complexity of what I'm managing, the alliances I'm building, the territory I'm protecting. This is bigger than your daughter, Isabella finished. Bigger than the fact that you missed her birth because you were fucking another woman? He flinched. She'd never spoken to him like this before. Never been crude, never been harsh. Isabella Vance was soft and sweet and decorative, but that woman was dying, hemorrhaging away with every word Adrian spoke. You need to rest, he said coldly. You're emotional. You're exhausted. We'll talk when you're being rational. Get out, Isabella said. Isabella? Get out! The scream tore from her throat, shocking them both. Get out and don't come back. You don't get to be here. You don't get to pretend you care. You chose. You chose Sophia over us, over everything. So go back to her and leave me alone. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Vance, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Mrs. Vance needs to rest. Adrian looked between Isabella and the nurse, his expression hardening. Fine. When you're ready to behave like an adult, we'll discuss this properly. He left. The door closed. Isabella turned her face into the pillow and finally let herself cry. She spent a week in the hospital while Lena fought her tiny, perfect battle in the NICU. Adrian visited once more, standing awkwardly beside the incubator, staring at his daughter like she was an artifact he didn't know how to categorize. She's small, he'd said. She's premature, Isabella had replied, not looking at him, all her attention on Lena's face. She'll grow. When can we take her home? We? Isabella had laughed, sharp and humorless. There is no we, Adrian. There's you and Sophia, and there's me and Lena. You made that very clear. You're my wife. That's my daughter. We're a family. No, Isabella had said quietly. We're people who share DNA. That's all we've ever been. He'd left after that, and he hadn't come back. 3 weeks later, Dr. Chen discharged Lena. She's doing remarkably well, the doctor had said, helping Isabella settle the baby into her car seat. You'll need to come back for regular checkups, but Mrs. Vance, you have a fighter here. She's going to be just fine. Isabella had looked at her daughter, still so small, but breathing on her own, eating on her own, those dark eyes staring up at her with fierce determination, and felt everything crystallize. This was what mattered. This tiny person who depended on her completely. Not the mansion, not the money, not the title of Mrs. Vance or the social standing that came with it. Just this. Just Lena. Marcus drove them home. Maria had prepared everything, a nursery in the guest suite, supplies, clothes, everything a baby might need. She'd done it quietly, without asking Adrian's permission, and Isabella loved her for it. Thank you, Isabella whispered, clutching Maria's hand while Lena slept in her bassinet. For everything, for seeing me when I was invisible. You were never invisible, child, Maria said fiercely. Not to those who had eyes to see. That night, Isabella put the final pieces of her plan into motion. She had 2 months, maybe 3, if she was careful, long enough for Lena to grow stronger, long enough to ensure her daughter could survive the journey ahead. And then, Isabella Vance was going to disappear. Not the wife, not the victim, not the woman who'd spent 3 years making herself smaller and smaller to fit into a life that had never wanted her. Someone new. Someone strong. Someone who chose her daughter first and everything else never. In the darkness, while Adrian slept across town in Sophia's bed, Isabella held her daughter and whispered promises. I'm going to get us out, she said softly. I'm going to find us somewhere safe. Somewhere you can grow up free from all of this. And I'm going to make sure he never has the power to hurt us again. Lena made a small sound, her tiny fingers wrapping around Isabella's thumb. We're going to disappear, Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength. And then, when we're safe, when you're safe, I'm going to dismantle everything he built. Not with violence, not with confrontation, but piece by piece, truth by truth, exposure by exposure. I'm going to show the world exactly who Adrian Vance really is. It wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about justice. About making sure that a man who chose power over his own child faced consequences for that choice. But more than that, it was about reclaiming herself. The woman she'd been before Adrian, and the woman she would become after him. Isabella looked down at her daughter, this small, fierce miracle who'd survived against all odds, and smiled. Your name means light, she whispered. And that's what we're going to be. Light in all his darkness, truth in all his lies. Lena slept on, peaceful and perfect, while her mother planned a vanishing act that would shake an empire to its foundations. The first withdrawal was small. $500 from an ATM in a grocery store parking lot 15 miles from the mansion. Isabella made the transaction wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, her heart hammering so hard she was sure the security cameras could see it pulsing in her throat. Nothing happened, no alarm bells, no immediate call from Adrian's security team. The money came out of the machine in crisp bills that she folded into her purse with shaking hands. It was proof of concept. The beginning of something that couldn't be undone. Over the next 6 weeks, Isabella became an expert at being invisible. She'd learned it from Adrian without realizing, watching him compartmentalize his life, maintain separate operations that never touched each other, create distance between his legitimate businesses and the empire built on fear. She withdrew cash in small increments from different ATMs across the city. Never the same location twice. Never more than what might be grocery money or shopping for the baby. The bank statements went to Adrian's office, and he hadn't looked at a household expense in 3 years. She sold jewelry piece by piece to pawn shops in neighborhoods where no one knew her face. Not the wedding ring, that would be noticed, but the diamond earrings Adrian had given her for their first anniversary. The sapphire necklace that had been a Valentine's gift back when he still remembered Valentine's Day. The tennis bracelet that she'd never particularly liked anyway. Each piece brought in thousands. Each transaction was cash only. No names, no records. She opened a bank account in a city 2 hours away, making the drive on a Tuesday afternoon when Adrian was in court dealing with one of his legitimate business holdings. The account was in the name Sarah Mitchell, a name she'd chosen carefully, common enough to be unremarkable, different enough from Isabella Moretti Vance that no casual search would connect them. "I'm leaving an abusive situation," she told the bank manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "I need an account that can't be traced to my legal name." The woman had looked at her for a long moment, taking in the expensive clothes and designer handbag, the way Isabella held herself with the careful control of someone who'd learned to make herself small. "We can do that," she'd said quietly. "I'll need to see some ID, but we have options for people in your situation. Do you have a safe place to go?" "I'm working on it," Isabella had replied, and it had been the truth. Finding the coastal town had taken research. She'd spent hours on her laptop in the middle of the night, while Lena slept beside her, scrolling through real estate listings and census data, looking for somewhere that met her criteria. Small enough that a stranger could disappear into the fabric of daily life. Large enough to have jobs and services. Far enough from Adrian's territory that his organization wouldn't have eyes there. Close enough to the ocean that she could hear the waves and remember that the world was bigger than the prison she'd been living in. Crescent Bay fit perfectly. A town of 8,000 people clinging to the Oregon coast, 3 hours from any major city. It had a hospital, schools, a small college that might need adjunct professors eventually. The cost of living was low enough that her savings could stretch for years if she was careful. She found a rental house online, a small cottage 2 blocks from the beach, owned by an elderly woman who'd moved into assisted living. The pictures showed weathered blue siding, a front porch with peeling paint, windows that looked out over scraggly pines. It was nothing like the mansion, nothing like the life she'd been living. It looked like freedom. "I'm interested in the property," Isabella had told the woman's daughter over the phone, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I can pay 6 months in advance. Cash." There'd been a pause. "That's unusual. I'm leaving a difficult situation. I need somewhere safe to start over with my baby girl. Your listing said immediate occupancy. I can be there in 3 days with the full amount." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "The house is yours. First and last month's rent, plus security deposit. You can mail the rest monthly. And Mrs. Sarah Mitchell," Isabella had said, the name tasting strange in her mouth. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," the woman had replied softly. "My mother left my father when I was 6. Best thing she ever did for both of us. You take care of that baby." The pieces were falling into place, but there was still the hardest part, choosing the moment to vanish. Adrian made it easy in the end. He announced one evening, one of the rare evenings he bothered coming home, that he'd be flying to New York for a week-long series of meetings with East Coast families looking to expand into his territory. "I need you to be at the Castellano Charity Gala while I'm gone," he'd said, not looking at her, his attention on his phone. "Sophia's coordinating it, but it'll look better if my wife makes an appearance. Show unity, family values, all that bullshit the society pages care about." Isabella had been feeding Lena, watching her daughter's face scrunch up with concentration as she ate. At 10 weeks old, Lena had grown stronger, more alert. Her dark eyes followed movement now, and sometimes Isabella swore she could see intelligence there, awareness beyond what a baby should have. "When is it?" Isabella had asked. "Saturday night. I leave Friday morning. Won't be back until the following Thursday. Sophia will send you the details." Of course Sophia would. Adrian's mistress coordinating events that his wife would attend. The humiliation was so casual, so complete, that Isabella had stopped feeling it weeks ago. "I'll be there," she'd lied. Adrian had glanced up then, something that might have been surprise crossing his face. "You will?" "You asked me to, so I will." She'd kept her voice neutral, submissive, the tone she'd perfected over 3 years of marriage, the tone that made her invisible. He'd smiled slightly. "Good, that's good. Maybe you're finally understanding how things work." He'd left the room without asking about Lena, without acknowledging his daughter's existence beyond the cursory glance he'd given her when she was first brought home from the hospital. That night, Isabella had finalized her plans. Friday morning arrived cold and gray, October rain hammering against the windows. Adrian left at dawn, Marcus driving him to the private airfield where his jet waited. He hadn't said goodbye to Isabella, hadn't kissed Lena, hadn't even looked back as he walked out the door. Isabella waited 3 hours to be certain he was gone. Then she began to move. She'd packed 2 bags over the previous week, hiding them in the back of the closet in the guest suite. One for her, clothes, documents, her mother's jewelry, the burner phone. One for Lena, everything a baby would need, plus the photograph of Isabella's mother that she'd kept on her nightstand, the one reminder of the woman who'd taught her that survival sometimes meant running. Maria found her in the nursery, methodically loading Lena's diaper bag with supplies. "You're leaving now," the housekeeper said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "Yes." Isabella didn't see the point in lying. "Today. This morning. Where will you go?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere he'll never think to look." Isabella zipped the diaper bag, her hands surprisingly steady. "I need you to wait until Monday to tell him I'm gone. Can you do that?" "Monday," Maria repeated. "That gives you 3 days. More than enough time to disappear." Isabella turned to face the older woman, this person who'd shown her more kindness in the last 3 months than her husband had in 3 years. "Thank you, Maria, for everything, for seeing me, for helping me." Maria's eyes were wet. "You're sure about this? If he finds you—" "He won't. I've been planning this for weeks. I've been careful." Isabella picked up Lena, who was awake and watching them both with those dark, serious eyes. "And even if he does find me, it doesn't matter anymore. I'd rather be found and free than safe and trapped." "You're braver than you know, child." "No," Isabella said quietly. "I'm just done being scared." She'd arranged for an Uber to pick her up 2 blocks from the mansion. The driver was a college student who barely looked at her face, just helped her load the bags into the trunk and made small talk about the weather, while Isabella clutched Lena and tried not to look back at the house that had never been a home. The bus station was crowded, exactly what she needed. Anonymous faces in transit, everyone moving, no one staying, no one looking twice at the woman with the baby who purchased a ticket to Portland with cash. "That's a long ride with a little one," the ticket agent had commented. "We're going to visit my mother," Isabella had lied smoothly. "She hasn't met her granddaughter yet." The ride took 7 hours. Lena slept most of the way, lulled by the engine's rumble. Isabella stared out the window and watched the landscape change from city to suburb to rural to wild, watched the trees grow denser and the sky grow wider, and felt something loosening in her chest. She was really doing this, really leaving. Every mile was distance between her and Adrian, between who she'd been and who she might become. In Portland, she rented a car using Sarah Mitchell's driver's license, a remarkably good fake that had cost her $2,000 and a meeting with one of Maria's cousins who knew people. The woman at the rental counter hadn't looked twice at it. The drive from Portland to Crescent Bay took another 3 hours along coastal highways that wound through forests and farmland. Isabella drove carefully, paranoid about being pulled over, about anything that might create a record of her passing through. But the roads were empty, the October afternoon gray and quiet, and no one stopped her. She arrived in Crescent Bay at sunset. The town was exactly as she'd pictured it, weathered buildings clinging to rocky cliffs, streets that curved to follow the coastline, the ocean stretching gray and endless to the horizon. There was a grocery store, a hardware shop, a diner with peeling paint, and a sign that advertised breakfast all day. Practical. Functional. Anonymous. Perfect. The cottage was at the end of a gravel driveway, surrounded by scraggly pines that bent away from the prevailing wind. The key was under the mat, exactly where the owner's daughter had said it would be. Isabella unlocked the door, Lena sleeping against her shoulder, and stepped inside. The house smelled like dust and old wood and sea air. The furniture was mismatched, a couch with floral upholstery that had probably been fashionable in the 80s, a kitchen table with 3 chairs, a rocking chair by the window. Nothing matched, nothing was expensive, nothing was designed to impress or intimidate. It was the most beautiful thing Isabella had ever seen. She set the bags down and carried Lena through the small house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely bigger than a closet. Everything was clean but worn, loved but aged. The windows rattled slightly in their frames. The floors creaked. The whole place felt fragile and temporary and absolutely real. Isabella stood in the doorway of what would be Lena's room, empty except for a dresser and a braided rug, and finally let herself cry. Not from fear, not from grief, from relief, from the bone-deep certainty that she'd made the right choice. "We're here," she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "We made it. We're free." That night, she slept more deeply than she had in years. The first weeks in Crescent Bay passed in a blur of necessity. Isabella transformed into Sarah Mitchell with methodical precision, learning to respond to the new name without hesitation, creating a history that would withstand casual scrutiny. She was a widow, she told the curious neighbors who introduced themselves. Her husband had died in a car accident 6 months ago. She'd needed to get away from the memories, start fresh somewhere quiet, where she could raise her daughter in peace. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Mrs. Patterson from next door had said, her weathered face creasing with genuine sympathy. The older woman had brought over a casserole and stayed to chat, asking gentle questions that Isabella answered with carefully constructed lies. "What was his name?" "David. David Mitchell. We met in college." The story flowed easily, built on truth twisted just enough to become fiction. "He was studying engineering. I was in literature." "And your family? Are they nearby?" "Both my parents are gone. I was an only child. David's family and we didn't see eye to eye after he died. It seemed better to make a clean start." Mrs. Patterson had nodded knowingly. "Sometimes that's what we need. A clean slate. Well, you're welcome here, dear. This town takes care of its own." Isabella found work within 2 weeks. The Crescent Bay Community College needed an adjunct English professor to teach composition courses. The pay was modest but steady. The interview had been surreal. Sitting across from the department chair, discussing literary theory and teaching philosophy, pretending she was just another single mother trying to make ends meet rather than a fugitive wife hiding from one of the most powerful crime bosses on the West Coast. "You're overqualified for this position," the chair had said, looking at the resume Isabella had carefully constructed using her real credentials from before marriage. "You have a master's degree from a prestigious university. Why Crescent Bay?" "I need somewhere quiet," Isabella had replied, and that at least was pure truth. "Somewhere my daughter can grow up away from the noise. Somewhere I can focus on teaching rather than building a career." She'd gotten the job. Started the following Monday, standing in front of 22 students who looked at her with the same mix of boredom and curiosity that college freshmen everywhere projected. "I'm Professor Mitchell," she'd said, and the name had felt real for the first time. "This is English 101. We're going to learn how to write clearly, think critically, and argue effectively. And if you work hard, you might even enjoy it." A few students had smiled. It was a beginning. Mrs. Patterson watched Lena during Isabella's teaching hours, refusing payment, until Isabella had insisted. "You're helping me," the older woman had said firmly. "This old house gets too quiet. Having a baby around reminds me of when mine were small." Life developed a rhythm. Mornings with Lena, feeding, playing, watching her daughter discover the world with wide-eyed fascination. Afternoons teaching, grading papers, preparing lectures. Evenings walking on the beach, the ocean wind cold and sharp, Lena bundled against Isabella's chest in a carrier, both of them breathing free air. Isabella kept her head down, her profile low. She didn't join social media, didn't post photos, didn't do anything that might create a digital trail leading back to her. She paid for everything in cash, she avoided cameras, she became thoroughly, completely ordinary. Sarah Mitchell was boring, predictable, unremarkable. Everything Isabella Vance had never been allowed to be. It was glorious. But at night, when Lena slept and the cottage was quiet except for the wind and the distant crash of waves, Isabella worked on the second phase of her plan. She'd taken more from Adrian than just her freedom. She'd taken information. During those long weeks of planning her escape, Isabella had paid attention. She'd listened when Adrian took calls in their house, thinking she was too focused on the baby to care about his business. She'd noted names, dates, details about deals that weren't quite legal, alliances built on threats rather than trust. She'd photographed documents that Adrian left carelessly on his desk, thinking his wife was too stupid or too scared to understand their significance. Contracts with falsified information, payoffs to city officials, evidence of money laundering through a dozen legitimate businesses, insurance fraud, tax evasion, connections to politicians who publicly claimed to be tough on organized crime while privately accepting Adrian's money. Isabella had copied files from his computer onto a series of flash drives that she'd hidden in Lena's diaper bag, the one place she knew Adrian would never look. She had ammunition. She just needed to be strategic about using it. The first move was small. An anonymous tip to the IRS about irregularities in the accounting for one of Adrian's shipping companies. She mailed it from a post office 3 towns over, wearing gloves, leaving no fingerprints. The letter contained copies of documents showing how the company was underreporting revenue, hiding profits in offshore accounts. Nothing happened immediately. The IRS moved slowly, carefully, investigating complex financial crimes with the thoroughness of accountants, rather than the aggression of police. Isabella waited. 6 weeks after her disappearance, Adrian's world began to fracture. She heard about it through the news first, a passing mention on the local Portland station she sometimes watched during dinner. Federal investigators have opened an inquiry into Vance Industries, the shipping conglomerate owned by controversial businessman Adrian Vance. Sources say the investigation centers on potential tax fraud and money laundering allegations. Isabella had smiled, feeding Lena mashed sweet potatoes, while her daughter grabbed enthusiastically at the spoon. "Your father is about to learn a very important lesson," she'd murmured. "Actions have consequences." The second move came a month later. An anonymous package delivered to the state attorney general's office containing detailed documentation of Adrian's connections to a series of politicians who'd voted to approve zoning changes that benefited his real estate developments. Emails showing explicit quid pro quo arrangements, bank transfers that couldn't be explained as legitimate campaign contributions. The scandal broke on a Tuesday. 3 state senators and a city councilman were forced to resign. The governor launched an ethics investigation. Every business deal Adrian had worked on in the last 5 years suddenly came under scrutiny. Isabella read about it online, sitting in the college library during her office hours. The articles didn't mention her name. No one had connected Adrian Vance's business troubles to his missing wife. Why would they? She was just a decorative spouse who'd disappeared, probably shacked up with a lover somewhere, certainly not capable of the kind of sophisticated financial investigation that was currently tearing through Adrian's empire. Their underestimation was her greatest weapon. She continued teaching, continued being Sarah Mitchell, the quiet young widow who graded papers at the coffee shop and walked her baby by the ocean and never caused any trouble. She attended faculty meetings and parent groups and town events, building a life that was so normal it was almost surreal. But every few weeks, another anonymous tip would find its way to the right authorities. Another business deal would collapse. Another investigation would open. Adrian's empire was being dismantled piece by piece, and no one could figure out who was behind it. Isabella was careful never to send too much at once. She understood strategy better than anyone gave her credit for. Overwhelming the system would make investigators suspicious, would make them wonder if someone was orchestrating the revelations. But a steady drip of credible information, each piece independently verifiable, each coming from a different source in a different way, that looked like multiple whistleblowers, disgruntled employees, rivals making their moves. It looked natural, inevitable, like the kind of collapse that happened when an organization was built on lies and held together with fear rather than loyalty. She was in the grocery store when she heard about the warehouse raid. Two women were talking in the cereal aisle, gossiping about the news. "Did you hear about that big bust down in the city? Some crime boss's operation got raided. They found drugs, guns, everything." Isabella had kept shopping, her face neutral, but her heart was racing. That would be the warehouse she'd tipped the DEA about 3 weeks earlier. She'd sent them shipping manifests showing how Adrian was using legitimate cargo as cover for drug distribution. She'd provided dates, times, the names of the trucking companies involved. The women continued talking. "I heard they arrested like 20 people. The guy who ran it all, he's looking at serious time. Not Adrian. He was too careful, too insulated. But one of his lieutenants, definitely. Someone high up enough that losing them would hurt." Good. By Christmas, Adrian's organization was bleeding money and people. Isabella watched from a distance, tracking the fallout through news reports and public records requests filed under various fake names. His legitimate businesses were failing under the weight of investigations. His illegal operations were being systematically dismantled. His allies were abandoning him, unwilling to risk association with someone under such intense scrutiny. She wondered if he thought about her, if he'd connected his missing wife to his crumbling empire. She doubted it. Men like Adrian didn't believe women were capable of strategic thinking. They saw wives as accessories, not adversaries. His blindness was almost sad. On Christmas Eve, Isabella sat in the cottage with Lena, now 6 months old, sitting up on her own, babbling in proto-language that sounded almost like conversation. She'd decorated a small tree with ornaments from the dollar store, made dinner on the ancient stove, played carols on the radio while Lena clapped her hands and laughed. It was the best Christmas of Isabella's life. "Next year," she told her daughter, "you'll be walking, you'll be talking. You'll help me decorate the tree and make cookies and all the things I never got to do when I was trying to be someone I wasn't." Lena gurgled, grabbing at Isabella's hair with sticky fingers. "Your father made a choice," Isabella continued softly. "He chose power over love, empire over family. And now he's learning that power built on fear is fragile, that empires without foundation collapse, that the woman he thought was weak was actually just waiting for the right moment to show him exactly how strong she'd become." She kissed Lena's forehead, breathing in the sweet baby smell of her. "We're going to be okay, baby girl, more than okay. We're going to be free and happy, and so far from that life that it'll seem like a story we once heard, rather than something we lived through." In the city, Adrian was spending Christmas alone. Sophia had left him 2 months earlier, quietly relocating to the East Coast when it became clear that association with him was becoming a liability. His house felt cavernous and cold. His phone stayed silent. His organization was in shambles. He'd hired investigators to find Isabella. They'd come back empty-handed every time. She'd vanished completely, as if she'd never existed. His wife and daughter were ghosts, and Adrian was beginning to understand that he would never see them again. He poured himself another drink and stared at the walls of the mansion that suddenly felt like a prison rather than a palace. Somewhere across the miles in the darkness, Isabella Mitchell rocked her daughter to sleep and hummed lullabies and planned the next move in a game that Adrian still didn't know he was losing. The dismantling of Adrian Vance's empire wasn't dramatic. It was methodical, surgical. Each cut placed with precision, each wound designed not to kill but to weaken, to expose, to diminish. And the woman making those cuts was invisible, patient, absolutely certain of her eventual victory. Because Isabella had learned something crucial in her years of marriage to a crime boss. Power wasn't about being the strongest or the loudest or the most feared. Power was about being underestimated until the moment you struck, about being patient enough to wait for the perfect opening, about understanding that sometimes the most devastating revenge was simply revealing the truth and letting consequences unfold naturally. Adrian Vance had taught her that, though he'd never meant to. Now she was teaching him what happened when you underestimated the quiet girl with the books and the soft voice and the capacity for strategic thinking that he'd never bothered to recognize. She was teaching him that losing everything was easy when you'd never bothered to build anything real. And she was teaching him that some disappearances were permanent. Spring came to Crescent Bay with unexpected violence. Storms rolled in off the Pacific, battering the coastline with rain and wind that made the cottage windows rattle like teeth. Isabella stood at the kitchen window watching the ocean churn gray and furious. Lena balanced on her hip and thought about the calm before destruction. Adrian would be feeling storms of his own by now. The federal indictment had come down in February, 17 counts of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. Isabella had read the charges online, sitting in the college library where she'd established a routine of checking news sites during her lunch break. The article had included a photo of Adrian being led from his office building, his face a mask of barely controlled rage, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the fact that he was just another criminal in handcuffs. She'd felt nothing looking at that photo. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even the shadow of the love she'd once convinced herself she felt. Just a distant recognition that this was a man she used to know, and now she didn't, and that was exactly how it should be. Da-da-da-da, Lena babbled, and Isabella's attention snapped back to her daughter. No, baby, she said softly. Mama. Can you say mama? Lena grinned, showing 4 tiny teeth, and smacked her hand against Isabella's cheek. Ma. That's my brilliant girl. Isabella kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and innocence. You're already smarter than your father ever gave anyone credit for being. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Isabella tensed automatically. Even after 8 months, unexpected visitors still triggered the old fear. The certainty that Adrian had found her, that her careful invisibility had failed. But it was just Mrs. Patterson, standing on the porch in a rain slicker, holding a covered dish. Thought you might like some company on this miserable afternoon, the older woman said, bustling inside without waiting for an invitation. And I made too much soup. Story of my life. Cooking for 2 when there's only 1. Isabella had learned that Mrs. Patterson's husband had died 5 years ago, that she had 3 children scattered across the country who rarely visited, that she'd adopted Isabella and Lena as surrogate family with the fierce determination of the lonely. You're always welcome here, Isabella said, meaning it. Mrs. Patterson had become something like the mother she'd lost, the grandmother Lena would never have. The older woman asked questions but never pried, accepted Isabella's careful lies without challenge, and loved them both with an uncomplicated generosity that still sometimes took Isabella's breath away. They ate soup at the kitchen table while rain hammered the roof. Lena sat in her high chair, making enthusiastic attempts to feed herself with a spoon, mostly succeeding in covering her face with pureed vegetables. I saw the news yesterday, Mrs. Patterson said casually, not looking at Isabella. About that businessman getting indicted, Adrian Vance. Terrible thing when powerful people think they're above the law. Isabella's hand tightened on her spoon. Yes, terrible. Of course, I also read that his wife disappeared last year, took their baby daughter and just vanished. Mrs. Patterson's blue eyes were sharp despite her age. The articles made her sound helpless, like she probably ran off with some other man or maybe met with foul play. But I got to thinking, maybe she was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. The kitchen was very quiet, except for Lena's happy babbling and the rain. Maybe she was, Isabella said carefully. Maybe she got away from a bad situation and built herself a new life. Maybe she's somewhere safe now, raising that baby girl, teaching college kids about literature. Mrs. Patterson smiled slightly. Maybe she even found someone who sees her for who she really is. Isabella's throat was tight. Mrs. Patterson, I don't need to know anything, dear. I just need you to know that some of us understand. Some of us see. The older woman reached across the table, squeezed Isabella's hand. And some of us will never say a word to anyone about the young widow who showed up in town right around the time a wealthy woman vanished from the city. Because that widow is a good mother, a fine teacher, and exactly the kind of neighbor this town is lucky to have. Tears burned behind Isabella's eyes. Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. We take care of our own here. Mrs. Patterson stood, gathering her empty bowl. Now, I've got a church meeting tonight, but I'll be by tomorrow to watch this little darling while you teach. And Sarah? It took Isabella a second to respond to the name. Yes? Whatever you did to survive, whatever choices you made, they were the right ones. Don't let anyone ever tell you different. After she left, Isabella held Lena close and let herself cry. Not from fear or grief, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, being understood, being protected by someone who asked nothing in return except the chance to love them. The spring semester ended with final exams and paper grading and exhausted students who'd somehow managed to learn critical thinking despite their best efforts to resist. Isabella had grown to genuinely love teaching, the challenge of making literature relevant to kids who'd rather be anywhere else, the satisfaction of watching comprehension dawn in a student's eyes, the simple pleasure of discussing ideas with people who were still young enough to believe they could change the world. Professor Mitchell? One of her students, a girl named Emma with purple hair and fierce opinions, lingered after the last class. I just wanted to say thank you for actually treating us like we had something worth saying. Most professors just lecture at us. You do have something worth saying, Isabella replied. All of you. You just need to learn how to say it clearly enough that people have to listen. Emma smiled. I'm taking your Composition 2 class next fall. If you're teaching it, I am, Isabella said, and realized she'd stopped thinking of this as temporary. Crescent Bay wasn't a hideout anymore. It was home. Summer brought tourists to the coastline, families in rental houses, couples walking hand in hand along the beach, teenagers working seasonal jobs at the ice cream shop and the tackle store. Isabella avoided the crowded areas, kept to her routine of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, became even more invisible among the temporary influx of strangers. Lena turned 1 in July. Isabella baked a cake in the tiny kitchen, decorated it with wonky frosting flowers that made her laugh. Mrs. Patterson came over with presents, a stuffed elephant, a board book, a hand-knitted sweater in soft yellow. They sang happy birthday, while Lena smashed her hands into cake and shrieked with delight. Can't believe she's already 1, Mrs. Patterson said, wiping frosting from Lena's face. Seems like yesterday you showed up on our doorstep with this tiny creature. She's growing so fast, Isabella murmured. Sometimes I look at her and I can see who she's becoming. Strong, stubborn, fearless. Like her mother, Mrs. Patterson said knowingly. That night, after Lena was asleep, Isabella sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge over the ocean. She'd sent the final piece of documentation to the FBI 2 weeks ago. The complete record of Adrian's offshore accounts, the shell companies, the bribes and payoffs, and carefully laundered money that had funded his empire for 2 decades. Everything she'd gathered, every scrap of evidence she'd collected during those last desperate weeks before her escape. The federal prosecutor had everything now, every weapon she had to give them. Adrian's trial was scheduled for September, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was going to prison, not for years, but for decades. His organization was already fractured beyond repair. His allies had turned on him or disappeared. His empire was ashes. She'd done it. Quietly, patiently, strategically. She'd done exactly what she'd promised herself that night in the hospital. She'd dismantled everything he'd built, and he'd never known she was the architect of his destruction. Isabella closed her eyes and listened to the waves and felt something loosen in her chest. The anger that had sustained her through the first months of freedom, the cold fury that had driven her to gather evidence and send those anonymous tips, it was fading, transforming into something else. Not forgiveness. Adrian didn't deserve forgiveness, but release. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you fought your battle and won, and now you can finally rest. She was free, truly, completely free. Not just from Adrian, but from the need to hurt him, to punish him, to make him understand what he'd lost. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, and that was justice enough. The call came on a Tuesday morning in August. Isabella was grading papers at the kitchen table while Lena played on the floor with blocks, stacking them carefully and then knocking them down with squeals of laughter. The phone rang, her burner phone, the one she kept for emergencies, the one whose number she'd never given anyone except the landlord and the college. She answered cautiously. Hello? Is this Sarah Mitchell? A woman's voice, professional and impersonal. Yes. Who's calling? My name is Rebecca Chen. I'm an attorney with the Federal Prosecutor's Office. A pause. I'm calling about Adrian Vance. Isabella's heart stopped, then started again, too fast. I don't know who that is. Mrs. Vance, or Ms. Mitchell, if you prefer. We know who you are. We've known for about 3 months. The attorney's voice was measured, calm. The information you provided was instrumental in building our case, but we need to talk to you. In person. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. And I think you're smart enough to understand that we're not interested in prosecuting you for anything. We just need to understand the full scope of what you discovered and whether there's anything else that might be relevant to the trial. Rebecca Chen paused. You're not in trouble, Mrs. Vance, I promise you that. But your testimony could ensure that your former husband never walks free again. Isabella looked at Lena, playing so innocently on the floor, completely unaware that her mother's carefully constructed life was suddenly balanced on a knife's edge. I can't, she whispered. If I testify, everyone will know where I am. He'll know where I am. He's in custody. He'll remain in custody throughout the trial, and afterward he'll be transferred to a federal prison far from Oregon. He'll never be able to reach you. His organization is in pieces. Everyone who had any loyalty to him has scattered. There's no one left to come after you. The attorney's voice softened slightly. I know you're scared. I know you've built a life for yourself and your daughter. But this is your chance to face him one final time and make sure he pays for everything he did. Not just the crimes we can prove, but the personal ones. The ones that don't show up in financial records or witness statements. Isabella closed her eyes. She'd known this moment might come, had known that her anonymity couldn't last forever, that eventually someone would connect the dots between the missing wife and the systematic destruction of Adrian's empire. I need time to think, she said. You have until Friday. After that, we proceed with what we have. Rebecca Chen's voice was firm, but not unkind. My number's on your caller ID. When you're ready to talk, call me. The line went dead. Isabella sat very still, the phone in her hand, her mind racing through scenarios and consequences. Testifying meant exposure. It meant standing up in a courtroom and facing Adrian, letting him see what she'd become, admitting that she'd been the invisible force destroying him all along. It meant risk, but it also meant closure, the kind of final confrontation that would sever the last threads connecting her to that life, to that version of herself. Mama? Lena was standing now, holding onto the edge of the table, looking up at her with those dark, serious eyes that saw more than a 1-year-old should. Mama, okay? Isabella picked up her daughter, held her close, felt that fierce protective love that had driven every decision she'd made since the night in the hospital. Mama's okay, baby, she whispered. Mama's just trying to figure out how to keep us safe forever. She called Rebecca Chen back on Thursday. The meeting was arranged for the following week in Portland. Rebecca Chen met her in a coffee shop, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that Isabella recognized from her own reflection lately. Thank you for agreeing to talk, Rebecca said, sliding a folder across the table. Before we begin, I want to show you something. The folder contained photographs. Adrian being led into court. Adrian in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller somehow, diminished. Adrian at a hearing, his face haggard and drawn, none of the power and arrogance that had once defined him visible in the defeated slouch of his shoulders. He's already lost, Rebecca said quietly. Everything that mattered to him is gone. His businesses, his reputation, his freedom. The trial is really just formality at this point. The evidence is overwhelming. Then why do you need me? Because juries are unpredictable. Because his attorneys are very good and very expensive, and they're going to argue that he was just a businessman who made some questionable decisions, that he's being unfairly targeted, that the real criminals were his associates who've already disappeared. Rebecca leaned forward. But if his wife testifies, the woman he abandoned, the woman who almost lost her baby because he couldn't be bothered to answer his phone, that narrative collapses. It becomes personal. The jury sees him not as a businessman, but as a man who chose power over family, who hurt the people who should have mattered most. Isabella thought about that night in the hospital. The hours of fear and pain, the silence of her unanswered calls, the moment she'd finally understood that she meant nothing to him, that she'd never meant anything except as an ornament to his status. "If I testify," she said slowly, "I want guarantees. Protection if I need it. A new identity if necessary. And I want assurance that my daughter will never, ever be used as leverage against me." "Done," Rebecca said immediately. "We can put all of that in writing. Witness protection if you want it. Though honestly, I don't think you'll need it. Adrian Vance is finished. His organization is scattered. The people who are left are too busy saving themselves to worry about revenge on his behalf." "When would the trial be?" "September 15th. We'd need you to come in a few days early to prepare your testimony. You'd be on the stand for maybe half a day. Then it's over." Isabella looked out the window of the coffee shop, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives. Shopping, talking, laughing, free and unburdened by the weight of the past. She could do this. She could face Adrian one last time, tell her truth, and then walk away forever. "I'll testify," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "I want to look him in the eye when I tell the court what he did to me. I want him to see exactly what he lost when he chose Sophia over his family. I want him to know that I'm the reason his empire fell. Not the FBI, not his enemies, not bad luck. Me." Isabella's voice was steel. "I want him to spend the rest of his life knowing that the woman he thought was weak destroyed him." Rebecca Chen smiled slightly. "I think that can be arranged." The weeks leading up to the trial passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Isabella continued teaching her summer course, continued walking Lena on the beach, continued being Sarah Mitchell in all the ways that mattered. But underneath the routine, she was preparing, mentally rehearsing her testimony, deciding what to say and what to leave unsaid, choosing which truths would hurt Adrian most. Mrs. Patterson agreed to watch Lena during the trial. "You go do what needs doing," she'd said firmly. "That baby will be safe and loved here until you come home." "What if I don't come home?" Isabella had whispered. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing's going to go wrong. You're going to walk into that courtroom, tell your story, and walk back out a free woman. And then you're going to come home to your daughter and live the life you've earned." Mrs. Patterson had gripped her shoulders. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah. Stronger than he ever understood. Now go show him." Isabella arrived in the city the week before the trial. Rebecca Chen had arranged a hotel room, unmarked cars for transportation, careful protocols to ensure Adrian couldn't track her movements. It felt excessive until Isabella remembered the man Adrian had been, vindictive, possessive, unwilling to accept any challenge to his control. Even imprisoned, even diminished, he might still be dangerous. The courthouse was massive, all stone and marble and the weight of institutional power. Isabella walked through security, was led through back corridors to a witness preparation room, and finally came face to face with the evidence of what she'd done. The prosecution's case was staggering. Box after box of documents, financial records, testimony from dozens of witnesses who'd turned on Adrian to save themselves. And woven through all of it, the information she'd provided, the tips that had started investigations, the evidence that had cracked open offshore accounts and shell companies, the systematic dismantling she'd orchestrated from a cottage in Crescent Bay while her daughter learned to walk and talk and laugh. "This is remarkable work," Rebecca said, watching Isabella examine the files. "Most whistleblowers give us one piece of the puzzle. You gave us the entire picture. Every connection, every transaction, every hidden account. It's like you understood his organization better than he did." "I paid attention," Isabella said quietly. "For 3 years I paid attention to everything he thought I was too stupid to understand. I learned how he thought, how his systems worked, where the weaknesses were. And then I exploited every single one." "Did he have any idea?" "No. I was invisible to him. The decorative wife who smiled at his events and stayed quiet when he talked business. He never imagined I was intelligent enough to be a threat." Isabella smiled slightly. That was his fatal mistake. The night before her testimony, Isabella couldn't sleep. She lay in the hotel room staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Young, naive, dazzled by wealth and power and the illusion of being protected. She'd married Adrian thinking he would keep her safe, never understanding that the greatest danger was Adrian himself. But that woman was gone, dead and buried somewhere between the hospital room and the cottage, between the first withdrawal and the last anonymous tip, between who she'd been forced to be and who she'd chosen to become. Tomorrow, Isabella Vance would walk into a courtroom for the first time in 18 months, and she would face the man who'd tried to make her small and show him exactly how large she'd grown. The courtroom was packed. Media, legal observers, members of Adrian's former organization who'd come to watch his fall. Isabella walked in wearing a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, no jewelry except her mother's pearl earrings. She looked nothing like the woman Adrian had married. That woman had been polished and expensive and carefully curated. This woman was real, substantial, grounded in a strength that came from surviving rather than performing. Adrian sat at the defense table, flanked by his attorneys. He looked older, grayer, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the chains at his wrists. When Isabella entered, his head snapped up. Their eyes met across the courtroom. She saw the exact moment he recognized her. The shock, the disbelief, the dawning rage as he understood that she was here, that she'd survived, that she was about to speak against him. Isabella smiled, cold and sharp and absolutely certain. The bailiff called her name. The prosecution calls Isabella Moretti Vance to the stand. She walked forward, was sworn in, sat down in the witness box with her hands folded calmly in her lap. Rebecca Chen approached, professional and prepared. Mrs. Vance, can you tell the court about your marriage to the defendant? Isabella looked directly at Adrian. I married Adrian Vance 3 years ago. I thought I was marrying someone who would protect me. Instead, I married someone who saw me as a possession, something to be displayed when useful and ignored when not. Can you describe the defendant's business activities as you understood them? Adrian ran a criminal enterprise disguised as a legitimate business empire. He laundered money through shipping companies, real estate developments, and dozens of shell corporations. He bribed politicians, intimidated rivals, and used fear to maintain control. And he did all of this while pretending to be a respectable businessman. Adrian's attorney stood. Objection. The witness is not qualified to testify about complex business operations. Your Honor, Rebecca interjected, the witness lived in the defendant's home, had access to his files and computers, and directly observed his business dealings. She's more qualified than most of our witnesses. Overruled. Continue. Isabella continued. For 3 hours, she walked the jury through everything she'd learned, everything she'd documented, everything she'd discovered while Adrian thought she was too focused on being a wife and mother to notice his crimes. She described the offshore accounts, the falsified records, the connections to criminal organizations. She explained how his legitimate businesses were fronts, how his charitable donations were really money laundering, how his political connections were built on corruption. And then Rebecca asked the question Isabella had been waiting for. Mrs. Vance, can you tell the court what happened when you went into premature labor? Isabella's voice was steady. I went into labor at 7 months pregnant. I was hemorrhaging. I called my husband 12 times. He didn't answer. He was with his mistress. She paused, let that sink in. I spent 6 hours in the hospital, terrified that I was losing my daughter, and he couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone. Did he eventually come to the hospital? Yes. The next morning, he stayed for 15 minutes and then left. Over the next 3 weeks, while our daughter fought to survive in the NICU, he visited twice. The second time, his mistress called and he walked out in the middle of the visit. Isabella's eyes were locked on Adrian's face. That was when I understood that I didn't matter to him, that our daughter didn't matter to him, that nothing mattered except his power and his empire and his own desires. What did you do? I left. I took my daughter and I disappeared, because I realized that staying meant teaching her that women exist to be ignored and devalued, and I refused to let her learn that lesson. Rebecca nodded. One final question, Mrs. Vance. The defense has suggested that you fabricated evidence against your husband out of revenge for his infidelity. What do you say to that? Isabella smiled slightly. I didn't fabricate anything. I simply documented what was already there. Adrian built an empire on lies and crime and fear. All I did was expose it. If that looks like revenge, it's only because the truth is so damning. Adrian's face was rigid with fury. His attorneys whispered urgently to him, but he shook them off, staring at Isabella with an intensity that might have frightened her once. Now it just felt satisfying. She'd won, completely and absolutely. And he knew it. The cross-examination was brutal. Adrian's lawyers tried to paint her as a scorned wife, an unreliable witness, someone motivated by personal vendetta rather than truth. But Isabella had prepared for this. She answered every question calmly, provided documentation for every claim, never wavered from her testimony. By the time she stepped down from the stand, even the defense attorneys looked defeated. Isabella walked out of the courtroom with her head high. She didn't look back at Adrian, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing any emotion on her face. She'd said what needed saying, done what needed doing. Now she was finished with him, forever. Rebecca Chen walked Isabella to the courthouse exit, her heels clicking against marble floors that echoed with centuries of judgment and consequence. "You did well in there," the attorney said. "Better than well." The jury was riveted. I watched them watching you, and they believed every word. Isabella didn't feel triumphant. She felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. When will the verdict come? Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. But Mrs. Vance, Isabella, the outcome isn't really in question. Not anymore. Between your testimony and the mountain of evidence we have, there's no scenario where he walks free. They stepped outside into September sunshine that felt too bright after the dim courtroom. Isabella blinked against the glare, disoriented by the normalcy of the world continuing around her. People walking past on their lunch breaks, traffic moving through intersections, pigeons pecking at dropped French fries on the sidewalk. Life, indifferent to the small drama of one man's empire collapsing. "What happens to me now?" Isabella asked. "You go home. You go back to your daughter, your teaching job, your life in Crescent Bay. We'll call you when there's a verdict, but you don't need to be here for it unless you want to be." Rebecca paused. "And Isabella, you're free. Truly free. He can't touch you anymore. He can't even think about you without bars between you and him." Isabella nodded slowly. Free. The word felt strange, too large to fully comprehend. She'd been free from Adrian physically for 18 months, but this was different. This was the legal severing, the official declaration that she was no longer his wife in any way that mattered, no longer connected to the empire she'd helped dismantle. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said, pulling an envelope from her briefcase. "The state seized Adrian's assets as part of the prosecution. The mansion, the cars, the artwork, everything. But there were some items that were legally yours. Jewelry you brought into the marriage, your mother's effects, personal documents. We've arranged for them to be returned to you." The envelope was thick, official-looking. Isabella opened it to find an itemized list of belongings she'd left behind when she fled. Her mother's wedding ring, the photograph albums from her childhood, a necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Small things, worthless to Adrian but priceless to her. "Thank you," she whispered. "The items are in storage. We can have them shipped wherever you'd like, or you can pick them up yourself. Your choice." Isabella thought about it. Going back to that mansion, even empty, even stripped of Adrian's presence, felt wrong. Like regression. Like inviting the past into a present she'd worked so hard to build. "Ship them to Crescent Bay," she said. "I don't need to see that place again." Rebecca smiled. "Smart choice. Now go home, Isabella. Go be Sarah Mitchell. Go be the woman you fought so hard to become." The drive back to Crescent Bay took 3 hours. Isabella made it in silence, the radio off, her mind replaying the testimony over and over. The look on Adrian's face when he'd realized she was the architect of his destruction. The moment the jury had leaned forward, completely absorbed in her story. The cold satisfaction of speaking truth to power and watching power crumble under its weight. She'd done it, everything she'd promised herself that night in the hospital, cradling her newborn daughter while Adrian chose his mistress over his family. She'd survived, she'd escaped, she'd rebuilt, and she'd ensured that Adrian would never have the opportunity to hurt anyone the way he'd hurt her. Mrs. Patterson was waiting on the porch when Isabella pulled into the driveway. The older woman had Lena on her hip, and the moment Isabella's daughter saw her, she started squirming and reaching out, making the urgent sounds that meant, "Mama, Mama, need you now." "There's my girl," Isabella said, taking Lena into her arms and breathing in that sweet baby smell that grounded her more than anything else could. "Did you miss me?" "Mama." Lena buried her face in Isabella's neck. "Mama home." "Mama's home," Isabella agreed. "Mama's always going to come home to you, Mrs. Patterson studied her face. It went well? It's over, Isabella said simply. All of it. Finally over. Good. The older woman squeezed her shoulder. Then it's time to stop looking back and start looking forward. You've got a whole life ahead of you, child. Time to start living it. That night, after Lena was asleep, Isabella sat on the porch and watched the ocean. The autumn air was cool, carrying the salt-sharp scent of the Pacific. Stars were emerging in the darkening sky, infinite and indifferent, and somehow comforting in their vastness. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca Chen. Jury's out. Could have a verdict as early as tomorrow. We'll keep you posted. Isabella typed back a quick acknowledgement and set the phone aside. Whatever happened in that courtroom tomorrow, or the next day or next week, didn't really matter anymore. The outcome was inevitable. Adrian was going to prison. His empire was already destroyed. The verdict would just be the official confirmation of what everyone already knew. She'd won. Not just the case, but something bigger. She'd won her life back, her autonomy, her identity, the right to define herself rather than being defined by her relationship to a powerful man. Isabella Vance had been a ghost, a shadow, a woman who existed only in relation to her husband's importance. But Sarah Mitchell was real, solid, her own person with her own thoughts and her own power. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for October. The prosecution was recommending 40 years without parole. Isabella received the news via text while she was teaching. She glanced at her phone during a bathroom break, saw Rebecca's message, felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tight. Guilty, she whispered to her reflection in the bathroom mirror. It's really over. Her reflection looked different than it had 2 years ago. Stronger. Older in the eyes, but younger everywhere else. Like shedding, Adrian had reversed some aging process that fear and unhappiness had accelerated. She looked like herself. Finally, completely herself. Isabella returned to class and taught her students about narrative structure, about how every story needed a clear resolution, about the importance of endings that felt earned rather than arbitrary. The best endings, she said, are the ones where the protagonist has fundamentally changed, where they've grown through their struggles and emerged as someone new. The journey matters, but the transformation is what makes a story resonate. One of her students, a quiet boy named Daniel, who rarely spoke up, raised his hand. What if the change is scary, though? What if becoming someone new means losing who you used to be? Isabella smiled. Then you have to ask yourself, who you used to be, was that really you? Or was it a version of yourself that you created to survive circumstances that no longer exist? Sometimes losing an old identity isn't loss. Sometimes it's liberation. The semester continued. Fall painted the coastline in shades of amber and rust. Lena learned new words daily, her vocabulary exploding with toddler enthusiasm. Doggy and birdie and cookie and more and mine. Isabella taught her classes, graded papers, attended faculty meetings, where the biggest drama was whether to change the required texts for freshman composition. Life was beautifully, gloriously ordinary. Adrian's sentencing happened on a Thursday in October. Isabella didn't attend. She'd already said everything she needed to say. Instead, she took Lena to the beach, let her daughter chase seagulls and squeal with delight every time a wave crashed on the shore. Rebecca called her that evening. 35 years. He'll be 73 before he's eligible for parole. Realistically, he'll die in prison. Isabella processed that information while watching Lena play with blocks on the living room floor. 35 years. Adrian would spend the rest of his life behind bars, his empire in ruins, his name synonymous with corruption and crime. How did he react? She asked. Stoic. Didn't show much emotion, but Isabella, he asked about you, asked if you were in the courtroom. What did you tell him? That you'd moved on, that you had a life now that had nothing to do with him. Rebecca paused. He looked devastated, like it finally hit him what he'd lost. Isabella felt nothing hearing that. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even pity, just a distant acknowledgement that somewhere, in a cell she'd never see, a man she used to know was finally experiencing consequences. Thank you for everything, Isabella said, for believing me, for protecting me, for helping me end this chapter. You did the hard part, Rebecca replied. I just provided the venue. But Isabella, if you ever need anything, if you ever feel unsafe, you call me. Understand? I understand. After hanging up, Isabella picked up Lena and spun her around until her daughter shrieked with laughter. We're free, baby girl. Completely, totally free. No more looking over our shoulders. No more fear. Just us and the ocean and the whole wide world ahead of us. Winter arrived with storms that battered the coast. Isabella weathered them in the cottage that had become home, grading papers by the fireplace while Lena napped, walking on the beach during breaks in the rain, breathing air that tasted like salt and freedom. The spring semester brought new students and familiar rhythms. Isabella had been teaching at Crescent Bay Community College for almost 2 years now. She'd earned respect from her colleagues, affection from her students, a reputation as someone who genuinely cared about teaching rather than just collecting a paycheck. Professor Mitchell? The department chair caught her after a faculty meeting in February. I wanted to talk to you about your contract. Isabella's stomach tightened. Is there a problem? The opposite. We'd like to offer you a full-time position, benefits, job security, the works. You've been an asset to this department, and we want to make sure you stay. Full-time, permanent. The words felt significant in a way Isabella hadn't expected. This wasn't temporary anymore. This wasn't a hiding place or a way station. This was her career, her life, her chosen path. I'd be honored, she said. Excellent. HR will send you the paperwork. Welcome to the permanent faculty, Sarah. That night, Isabella celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine she'd been saving. Mrs. Patterson came over to share the meal and fuss over Lena, who was now talking in full sentences and had recently become obsessed with asking why about everything. Why ocean wet, Mama? Because it's made of water, baby. Why water wet? That's just the nature of water. Why nature? Mrs. Patterson laughed. You've got a philosopher on your hands. Or a lawyer, Isabella said, and then caught herself. Adrian had been a lawyer, technically, before he'd abandoned any pretense of legitimacy. She didn't want Lena following that path, didn't want her daughter anywhere near the world of power and corruption that had nearly destroyed Isabella. Or a teacher, Mrs. Patterson suggested gently, reading her expression, like her brilliant mother. The thought warmed Isabella. Lena as a teacher, helping others learn and grow, using intelligence for good rather than manipulation, building something positive rather than destructive. That would be nice, Isabella agreed. Spring became summer. Lena turned 2 with another homemade cake and another small celebration with Mrs. Patterson. Isabella's teaching contract was renewed with a small raise. The cottage's landlord offered to sell her the property at a reasonable price, and Isabella, who'd been carefully saving money, living frugally, building financial security, discovered she could actually afford it, owning a home. Not a mansion built to impress, but a small cottage by the sea. Hers, really hers. The deed would say Sarah Mitchell, but it would mean Isabella Moretti had finally found solid ground to stand on. She signed the papers in July, sitting in a lawyer's office in Portland while Lena colored on scrap paper and asked questions about every object in the room. Congratulations, Ms. Mitchell, the lawyer said, sliding the deed across the table. You're officially a homeowner. Isabella looked at the document, her fake name made legal through 2 years of careful performance. Sarah Mitchell was real now. Not just a fiction she'd created, but a person with a job, a home, a life. Isabella Vance existed only in court records and old news articles, a ghost haunting the internet, but absent from physical reality. She wondered sometimes what would happen if someone from her old life saw her. If one of Adrian's former associates walked past her on the street, would they recognize the woman who used to smile nervously at charity galas? Probably not. That woman had been polished and frightened, perpetually trying to be smaller and quieter and more acceptable. This woman was confident, comfortable, grounded in a strength that came from survival. Fall arrived again, bringing with it the start of another academic year. Isabella had been in Crescent Bay for 2 years now. 2 years of teaching, mothering, building a life that felt authentically hers. She'd made friends among the faculty, other women who understood the challenges of balancing career and motherhood, who swapped babysitting duties and grading horror stories over coffee. She'd even been on a few dates, though nothing serious. a marine biologist from the research station up the coast, who'd been kind and interested but ultimately too focused on his work. A local contractor who'd made her laugh but wanted more than she was ready to give. Isabella wasn't sure she'd ever be ready for another relationship. The idea of trusting someone with that much power over her emotional landscape felt impossible after Adrian. But she was content, more than content. She was happy in a quiet, sustainable way that didn't require constant validation or excitement. She had work she loved, a daughter she adored, a community that had accepted her, and freedom she'd earned through courage and strategy. One October afternoon, Isabella was walking on the beach with Lena when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Is this Isabella Vance?" A man's voice, unfamiliar. Her blood went cold. No one in Crescent Bay called her that. No one knew that name. "Who is this?" she asked carefully. "My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm a literary agent in New York. I've been trying to track you down for months." He sounded excited, energetic. "I read the trial transcripts from your husband's case. Your testimony was extraordinary. The way you described systematically dismantling his empire while raising an infant, hiding in plain sight, it's compelling. Have you ever considered writing a book?" Isabella stopped walking. Lena was playing in the sand nearby, completely absorbed in building a castle. The ocean crashed and retreated, eternal and indifferent. "A book," she repeated. "Your story is incredible. The vulnerable wife who turns out to be smarter than the crime boss. The methodical revenge, the escape, the new life. It's got everything. True crime, personal narrative, social commentary about domestic abuse and power dynamics. Publishers would be fighting over it." "Mr. Brennan," Isabella said slowly, "I appreciate your interest, but I'm not interested in reliving that part of my life. I've moved on. I have a daughter to protect and a career I care about. Turning my trauma into entertainment isn't something I'm willing to do." "I understand," he said, though he sounded disappointed. "But if you ever change your mind, here's my number. And Ms. Vance, for what it's worth, what you did took incredible courage. You should be proud." After he hung up, Isabella stood on the beach for a long time, watching Lena play. A book. Her story, published for the world to read. Part of her understood the appeal. It was a good story, the kind that would resonate with women trapped in bad relationships, that might give them hope or courage or ideas about escape. But it was also her life, her pain, her daughter's history, and she'd already sacrificed so much to Adrian's need for power and control. She wasn't about to sacrifice her hard-won peace to the public's hunger for dramatic narratives. "Mama, look!" Lena held up a perfectly formed sand tower. "Castle." "That's beautiful, baby," Isabella said, kneeling beside her daughter. "You're so creative." "Like you, Mama. Teacher, Mama." Isabella pulled Lena into a hug, breathing in her daughter's sun-warmed hair. This was what mattered. Not book deals or public vindication or turning their story into commodity. Just this. Just the quiet joy of watching her daughter grow, of building a life that was normal and peaceful and completely their own. The years began to blur together in the best possible way. Lena turned 3, then 4, starting preschool and making friends with the unself-conscious ease of children. Isabella got tenure at the college, published a few academic articles about teaching composition to non-traditional students, became known as the professor who actually cared whether her students learned anything. She bought a car to replace the rental she'd been driving for 3 years. A used Honda with good gas mileage and enough room for car seats and groceries and all the detritus of normal life. She painted Lena's bedroom a soft yellow, planted a garden in the small backyard, replaced the ancient refrigerator with a new one that didn't sound like it was dying. Small victories. Normal accomplishments. The kind of things that would have been beneath notice in her old life but felt monumental now because they were hers, earned through her own work rather than Adrian's money. Mrs. Patterson's health began to decline in the 4th year. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of age and wear. Isabella helped where she could, driving her to doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, making sure she took her medications. It was the least she could do for the woman who'd given her family when she had none, who'd protected her secret without question, who'd loved Lena like a grandmother. "You've been good to me, Mrs. Patterson said one afternoon, sitting in the cottage's living room while Lena showed her drawings from preschool. Better than my own children, if I'm honest. They call once a month, visit once a year. But you're here. You saved me, Isabella said quietly. When I first came to Crescent Bay, I was so scared and alone. You saw me. You helped me. Of course I'm here. The older woman smiled. I knew there was something special about you from the start. Something broken, but healing. I'm glad I got to watch you put yourself back together. Mrs. Patterson died peacefully in her sleep in January, 5 years after Isabella had arrived in Crescent Bay. The funeral was small. Her children flew in for 2 days, looking vaguely guilty and mostly concerned with sorting through their mother's possessions. They offered to sell Isabella the house next door for a reasonable price. Mom always talked about you, the daughter said. Said you were the best neighbor she ever had. I think she'd like knowing you were still here, keeping an eye on the place. Isabella couldn't afford to buy it, but she helped clean it out, sorting through decades of accumulated life. She found letters Mrs. Patterson had written, but never sent to her children, gently scolding them for their absence. She found photo albums full of memories. She found, tucked into a drawer, a handwritten note addressed to her. Sarah, it read, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I want you to know that you gave me purpose these last years. Watching you grow strong, watching Lena grow happy. It reminded me that life continues, that people can heal, that courage comes in unexpected forms. You are braver than you know. Don't forget that. And don't let the past define your future. You've earned the right to be happy. Choose happiness, always. With love, Margaret. Isabella cried reading it, mourning not just Mrs. Patterson, but the version of herself that had needed that validation, that reminder that she deserved peace and joy. She was stronger now, grounded. The woman who'd fled Adrian's mansion was barely recognizable in the woman she'd become, competent, confident, unafraid of the future because she'd already survived the worst and emerged intact. Lena started kindergarten that fall. Isabella walked her to the bus stop on the first day, watching her daughter climb aboard with a backpack almost as big as she was, waving enthusiastically from the window. She'll be fine, another mother said, seeing Isabella's expression. First day is hardest on the parents. I know, Isabella said. It's just, she's growing up so fast. They all do. One day they're babies, the next they're getting on the school bus. The woman smiled. I'm Jennifer, by the way. My son's in Lena's class. Sarah, Isabella said, the name automatic now. Sarah Mitchell. They became friends, the casual way parents of young children do. Coffee while the kids were at school, play dates at the park, shared complaints about homework and early bedtimes. Jennifer knew nothing about Isabella's past, saw only the present, a single mother, a college professor, someone living a quiet life by the sea. It was enough. It was everything. 6 years after Isabella had disappeared from the city, Adrian Vance died in prison. Heart attack, sudden and fatal. He was 58 years old. Rebecca Chen called to tell her, I thought you should know. It happened last night. He was gone before the medics arrived. Isabella was in her office at the college, preparing for her afternoon class. She sat down slowly, processing the information. Dead. Adrian was dead. The man who'd dominated her life for 3 years, who'd haunted her thoughts for 6 more, was simply gone. How do you feel? Rebecca asked gently. I don't know, Isabella said honestly. I thought I'd feel relief or satisfaction or something, but I just feel empty, like this final chapter I'd been expecting never got written. Maybe that's okay. Maybe some stories don't need dramatic endings. Maybe they just need to end. After hanging up, Isabella sat in her office for a long time, staring at nothing. Adrian was dead. She would never have to worry about him being released, about him finding her, about him having any power over her life ever again. The threat she'd been unconsciously carrying for 6 years was simply gone. She'd won. So completely that her opponent no longer even existed. That night, Isabella told Lena about her father for the first time. Not the whole story. Her daughter was only 6, too young for the full truth, but a simplified version. Your daddy died, she said gently, sitting on Lena's bed. He was sick, and now he's gone. Lena processed this with the matter-of-fact acceptance of children. Did I know him? You met him when you were a baby, but he lived far away and you don't remember him. Was he nice? Isabella considered lying, decided on a version of the truth. He was complicated. He made some good choices and some bad choices, but one of the good choices was helping create you. I'm a good choice. The best choice I ever made was keeping you safe and loving you every single day. Isabella kissed her daughter's forehead. And that's what matters. Not who your daddy was, but who you're going to become. Lena nodded, already moving on with the resilience of the young. Can we have pancakes tomorrow? We can have pancakes tomorrow. After Lena fell asleep, Isabella walked on the beach under a sky full of stars. The ocean was calm, the waves gentle, the autumn air cool and clean. She thought about the woman she'd been 7 years ago, pregnant and terrified and invisible. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the planning, the careful construction of a new identity, the systematic dismantling of Adrian's empire. She'd done it all, survived, escaped, rebuilt, ensured that Adrian faced consequences. And now he was gone. And she was still here, still standing, still moving forward. The past was finally, truly past. No more court cases, no more looking over her shoulder, no more wondering if someday Adrian would find her. It was over. Isabella stood at the edge of the water and let the waves wash over her feet, cold and real and grounding. She was 32 years old. She had a daughter, a career, a home, a future that stretched out indefinitely with no shadow looming over it. She was free. Completely, permanently, irrevocably free. And she had no idea what to do with all that freedom except keep living, keep teaching, keep raising Lena to be strong and kind and unafraid of the world. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything she'd fought for and everything she'd earned. The years that followed Adrian's death passed with a gentleness that Isabella had never imagined possible. There were no more phone calls from attorneys, no more news alerts about investigations or trials, no more checking over her shoulder for threats that no longer existed. The constant vigilance she'd maintained since her escape slowly, gradually dissolved into something approaching true peace. Lena grew like wildflowers grow, naturally, enthusiastically, reaching toward the sun without hesitation. She was 7, then 8, then 9. A bright, curious child who asked endless questions and devoured books the way Isabella once had, who collected shells on the beach and built elaborate sandcastles and made friends with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been taught to make herself small. Isabella watched her daughter grow and felt a fierce gratitude that bordered on religious. This child knew nothing of fear or silence or the careful performance of acceptable femininity. Lena was loud when she wanted to be loud, quiet when she chose quiet, angry when things were unfair and joyful when life was good. She was authentically, unapologetically herself in a way Isabella had never been allowed to be. "Mama, why do some kids have dads and I don't?" Lena asked one afternoon when she was 9. They were walking home from the library, Lena's backpack stuffed with books about marine biology and ancient civilizations. Isabella had known this question would come eventually. She'd prepared for it, rehearsed various answers, but the reality of her daughter's serious dark eyes looking up at her made all the rehearsed words feel insufficient. "You had a dad," Isabella said carefully, "but he died when you were very young. You don't remember him. What was he like?" Isabella chose her words with precision. "He was powerful, smart. He built an empire, though not a good one. He made choices that hurt people, including us, and he had to face consequences for those choices." Lena processed this with the thoughtful intensity she brought to everything. "Did you love him?" "I thought I did once, but I was very young, and I didn't understand what love really meant. Real love is what I have with you, wanting the best for someone, protecting them, showing up every single day no matter what." "Did he love us?" The question cut deeper than Isabella expected. She stopped walking, knelt down so she was eye level with her daughter. "I don't think he knew how. He loved power more than people, and that's a very sad way to live, because power doesn't keep you warm at night, or celebrate your victories, or hold you when you're scared." Lena nodded, then threw her arms around Isabella's neck. "I'm glad I have you, Mama. You're the best person I know." Isabella held her daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the ocean wind in her hair, and felt the last small knot of old pain finally loosen and drift away. The cottage had become more than a house over the years. Isabella had painted every room, replaced the ancient plumbing, refinished the hardwood floors that had been hidden under worn carpet. She'd built bookshelves that now groaned under the weight of her collection: literature and poetry and feminist theory, teaching texts and children's books and guilty pleasure mysteries. The front porch held 2 rocking chairs where she and Lena would sit on summer evenings, watching the sun set over the Pacific. It was hers. Completely, legally, emotionally hers. The deed said Sarah Mitchell, and sometimes Isabella forgot that wasn't the name she'd been born with. Sarah felt more real than Isabella ever had. Sarah was a woman who'd built her own life, who'd earned everything she had, who owed nothing to anyone except herself and her daughter. The college promoted her to associate professor when Lena was 10. It came with a raise, more job security, and the kind of professional respect Isabella had once thought was reserved for people who came from the right families or married the right men. But she'd earned this through her own work, her own dedication to teaching students that the world had written off as incapable of intellectual rigor. "Professor Mitchell changed my life," one of her former students wrote in a recommendation letter that the department chair showed her. "She was the first teacher who made me believe I was smart enough for college. Now I'm getting my master's degree in education because I want to do for other students what she did for me." Isabella kept that letter in her desk drawer and read it on hard days when she questioned whether any of this mattered, whether she was making a difference or just going through motions. She was making a difference. Not through power or control or fear, but through showing up, caring, believing in people's potential, even when they didn't believe in themselves. It was the opposite of everything Adrian had stood for, and that felt like its own kind of victory. Lena turned 12, entering that awkward stage between childhood and adolescence, where everything was drama and intensity and shifting emotional landscapes. She fought with friends, reconciled with friends, developed crushes on boys who didn't notice her and girls who did. She wanted independence but also still needed her mother, oscillating between "I can do it myself" and "Mama help me," sometimes within the same conversation. Isabella navigated it all with patience learned from years of survival. She set boundaries but allowed freedom within them. She listened more than she spoke. She trusted Lena to make mistakes and learn from them, intervening only when safety was truly at risk. "You're really good at this," Jennifer said one afternoon. They were having coffee while their daughters were at soccer practice. Jennifer's marriage had recently ended, and she was struggling with single parenthood in a way that made Isabella grateful she'd never had to share custody or negotiate co-parenting with Adrian. "Good at what?" Isabella asked. "Being a mom, being present but not smothering, letting Lena be herself while still keeping her safe." Jennifer stirred her coffee absently. "I keep trying to control everything, and it just pushes my kids away." "How do you make it look so easy?" Isabella thought about those early months in Crescent Bay, alone and terrified, learning to parent without a manual or a partner or any idea what she was doing. "It's not easy, but I learned early that trying to control people just makes them resent you. And I never wanted Lena to resent me. I wanted her to trust me, so I had to earn that trust by showing her I respected her autonomy even when she was tiny." "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple. It's just necessary." Isabella paused. "I grew up watching someone use control as love. It taught me exactly what kind of parent I didn't want to be." Jennifer looked at her curiously. "You never talk about Lena's father. He's dead, has been for years, and honestly, he was never really part of our lives, even when he was alive." "Was he?" Jennifer hesitated. "Was it a bad situation?" Isabella considered how much to share. Jennifer had become a genuine friend over the years, someone she trusted. But the full truth felt too large, too complicated, too tied to an identity she'd spent 12 years leaving behind. "It was complicated," she said finally. "He was powerful and controlling, and he didn't understand that love means wanting the best for someone, not owning them. I left when Lena was a baby. Best decision I ever made." "Brave decision," Jennifer corrected. "Maybe. Or maybe just the only option I had left." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, 2 women who'd survived their own versions of hard things and come out the other side intact, if not unscarred. When Lena was 13, she asked about her father again, this time with more specific questions, the kind that came from piecing together overheard conversations and internet searches and the developing critical thinking skills of a teenager. "Mama, was my father a criminal?" They were in the kitchen making dinner together, a ritual they'd maintained even as Lena had grown increasingly independent. Isabella's hands stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. What makes you ask that? I Googled our last name, Mitchell, but then I remembered that storage box in your closet with old photos. There was a wedding picture, and the name on the back said Isabella Moretti Vance. Lena's voice was calm but determined. That's you, isn't it? You changed your name. And when I searched Adrian Vance, I found all these articles about a trial in corruption and organized crime. Isabella set down the knife carefully. She'd known this moment would come, had dreaded it and prepared for it in equal measure. Yes, she said quietly, that was your father. And yes, I changed my name when we left. I needed us to be safe. Safe from him? Safe from everything he represented. His world, his choices, his refusal to see us as anything more than accessories to his power. Isabella turned to face her daughter fully. I'm sorry I lied to you, Lena. I wanted to protect you from all of it, from knowing that your father was someone who hurt people, who chose power over his own family, who never cared about us the way we deserved. Lena's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Did he hurt you? Not physically, but there are other ways to hurt people. Neglect is its own kind of violence. Indifference can be more painful than cruelty because at least cruelty acknowledges you exist. Is that why we left? I left because I was in the hospital, bleeding, terrified I was losing you, and he wouldn't answer his phone because he was with another woman. I left because in that moment I understood that staying meant teaching you that women are supposed to accept being invisible, and I refused to let you learn that lesson. Lena was crying now, but she was also nodding. I'm glad you left. Me too, baby. Every single day I'm glad. They held each other in the kitchen while dinner got cold, mother and daughter, two people who'd survived the same man in different ways. I don't want to be a Vance, Lena said eventually. I want to be a Mitchell, like you, like us. Then we'll make it official, Isabella said. We'll legally change your name. You can be Lena Mitchell for real, not just in practice. They did exactly that. The legal process was simple, a petition to the court, a hearing where Lena explained that she wanted to take her mother's chosen name, a judge who approved it without question. Lena Mitchell became her daughter's legal identity, severing the last paper connection to Adrian Vance. How do you feel? Isabella asked afterward, standing on the courthouse steps. Like I finally know who I am, Lena said. Not someone's daughter or someone's legacy. Just me, Lena Mitchell, person. Isabella smiled through tears. You've always been just you, baby. This just makes it official. High school brought new challenges. Lena was brilliant but restless, bored by conventional education, frustrated by teachers who taught to the test rather than teaching students to think. She argued with administrators about dress codes and censorship and the way her school prioritized athletics over arts. She organized a banned books club and a beach cleanup initiative and a petition to get solar panels installed on the school roof. She was passionate and fierce and absolutely unafraid of authority in a way that sometimes terrified Isabella and always made her proud. She's going to change the world, Jennifer said, watching Lena give a presentation at a town council meeting about climate change at 15, or burn it down trying. Hopefully change it, Isabella murmured. But I wouldn't bet against the burning either. Lena got into every college she applied to, full scholarships to prestigious universities, acceptance letters that praised her academic achievements, and her community involvement and her unique perspective and fierce dedication to social justice. I want to go to the state university, Lena announced at dinner one night during her senior year. I know everyone thinks I should go to the fancy schools, but the state school has the best marine biology program on the West Coast, and I can come home on weekends if I want. If that's what you want, Isabella said, then that's what you should do. But Lena, you don't have to come home on weekends. You're allowed to go away, to experience independence, to build your own life. I know, but I like being close to you. Is that weird? It's not weird. It's wonderful. Isabella reached across the table, squeezed her daughter's hand. I just want to make sure you're choosing what you want, not what you think I need. I'm choosing me, Lena said firmly. Marine biology at State, apartment near campus, but close enough to visit. That's what I want. So that's what she did. moved into a cramped apartment with two roommates, dove into her studies with the same intensity she brought to everything, came home every few weeks with laundry and stories and the kind of exhausted joy that came from pursuing a passion. Isabella adjusted to the empty house with surprising ease. She'd spent 18 years focused on being a mother, and now she had space to remember she was also herself. She took up painting, joined a book club, started volunteering at the local women's shelter, helping other women escape situations that reminded her too much of her own past. "You understand what they're going through," the shelter director said. "You speak their language. They trust you in a way they don't trust people who've never experienced that kind of control." Isabella didn't share her full story with the women she counseled, but she shared pieces of it. The fear, the planning, the careful accumulation of resources, the moment of choosing herself over security. "How did you know you were ready to leave?" one woman asked during a group session. She was young, maybe 25, with a toddler clinging to her leg and bruises she'd tried to cover with makeup. "I never felt ready," Isabella said honestly, "but I knew staying was killing me slowly and leaving was my only chance at survival. So I chose the fear of the unknown over the certainty of continued suffering. What if he finds me?" You make it as hard as possible for him to find you. You plan carefully. You don't tell anyone where you're going. You build a new life so different from your old one that he wouldn't recognize you even if he saw you. Isabella paused. "And you remember that you're stronger than you think. Survival takes strength. Leaving takes courage. You have both of those things, or you wouldn't be here asking these questions." The woman nodded, something shifting in her expression. Hope, maybe. Or determination. The same look Isabella had seen in her own reflection all those years ago. She helped 3 women escape that year, helped them find housing, apply for jobs under new names, navigate the legal system to get protective orders, helped them understand that leaving wasn't failure, it was survival. Each woman she helped felt like honoring the journey she'd taken, like transforming her pain into purpose. Lena graduated with honors at 22. Immediately accepted into a graduate program studying coastal ecosystem restoration. She'd grown into a confident young woman with her mother's dark eyes and her own fierce determination, someone who spoke truth to power without hesitation and loved the ocean with the kind of passion that couldn't be taught. "I want to work on restoration projects," Lena explained over dinner at the cottage, home for a weekend between semesters. "Rebuilding coral reefs, cleaning up pollution, helping ecosystems recover from human damage, taking broken things and making them whole again." Isabella heard the echo of their own story in that mission and smiled. "That's beautiful work, baby. Important work." "You taught me that broken things can heal," Lena said, "that it's possible to survive trauma and build something better afterward. I want to do that for the ocean. Give it the same chance you gave us." They walked on the beach that evening, something they'd done countless times over the years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Lena walked with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted from life. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked suddenly. "Leaving everything behind? Starting over with nothing?" "Never," Isabella said without hesitation. "Not once. Because leaving gave me you, the real you, growing up free and unafraid. Staying would have meant teaching you to be small and silent and acceptable. And you, my brilliant, fierce girl, were never meant to be any of those things." Lena smiled. "I like who I am. I like who we are." "Me too, baby. Me too." Years passed. Isabella turned 50, then 52. She was tenured, respected, known in Crescent Bay as the professor who'd been part of the community for over 20 years. She dated occasionally over the years, a fellow professor, a local artist, a widower who owned the bookstore, but nothing that made her want to give up her hard-won independence. She was content alone, complete in herself. The idea that she needed someone else to be whole felt like a story from another lifetime. Lena finished her PhD at 28, took a position with a nonprofit focused on marine conservation, got engaged to a marine biologist named Marcus, who was kind and brilliant and genuinely supportive of Lena's ambitions. They married on the beach in Crescent Bay, a small ceremony with close friends and the ocean as witness. Isabella watched her daughter exchange vows and felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. This was what she'd fought for. This exact moment, Lena standing in the sand in a simple white dress, promising her life to someone who saw her clearly and loved what he saw, choosing partnership as an equal rather than accepting it from a position of weakness. "You did good," Jennifer whispered beside her, both of them crying happy tears. "Look at her. She's extraordinary." "She is," Isabella agreed, "and she earned every bit of it herself." After the ceremony, while guests mingled and ate cake and danced to music provided by a local band, Lena pulled Isabella aside. "I need to tell you something," her daughter said, her eyes bright with emotion. "When I was researching my father all those years ago, I found more than just news articles. I found trial transcripts. I read your testimony." Isabella's breath caught. "Lena, I read how you systematically documented everything, how you planned your escape for months, how you fed information to prosecutors while hiding in plain sight, how you destroyed his empire piece by piece while raising me and building a new life." Lena's voice was thick with tears. "Mama, you were incredible. You are incredible. And I need you to know that I see you. I see everything you did, everything you sacrificed, everything you built from nothing." "You were never supposed to carry that knowledge," Isabella whispered. "Maybe not, but I'm glad I do. Because it taught me that strength isn't about being loud or aggressive. It's about being smart and strategic and patient. It's about surviving impossible situations and coming out the other side still capable of love and hope and building something beautiful." Lena hugged her fiercely. "You taught me that, not with words, but with your life. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be as brave as you were." Isabella held her daughter and let herself cry. Not from grief or fear or old pain, but from the overwhelming knowledge that she'd done it. She'd broken the cycle. She'd raised a daughter who was strong and free and unafraid, who understood that power came from within rather than from control over others. She'd won. Completely and finally. The years that followed were gentle. Isabella retired from teaching at 55, ready to rest after 3 decades of shaping young minds. She volunteered more at the women's shelter, wrote a handbook on practical steps for leaving abusive relationships that the shelter distributed widely, traveled to places she'd only read about in books. She visited Lena and Marcus, spent time with her grandchildren when they came along. 2 beautiful children who called her Nana and loved the ocean as much as their mother did. She watched them grow with the same fierce joy she'd felt watching Lena, seeing in them the continuation of something she'd started all those years ago when she'd chosen survival over safety. One afternoon when Isabella was 62, she was walking in a park in the city with Lena and the grandchildren. It was a rare visit to her old territory. Lena had a conference here, and Isabella had agreed to come along, curious to see how the place had changed in the decades since she'd fled. The city was different, cleaner somehow, less oppressive. Or maybe she was different, no longer seeing it through the lens of fear and confinement. They were feeding ducks by a pond, the children shrieking with delight every time a bird came close, when Isabella felt it. That prickle of awareness that comes from being watched. She turned and saw him. Not Adrian. He'd been dead for over 30 years. But a man who looked enough like him that her breath caught. Similar build, similar coloring, standing by a tree about 50 yards away. He was staring at her with an intensity that felt familiar and wrong. Then Isabella realized it wasn't a stranger. It was Adrian's brother, Michael. She'd met him twice during her marriage, brief encounters at family events. He'd been kind to her in a distant way, never part of Adrian's organization, working as something legitimate like an accountant or a lawyer. Recognition crossed his face. He started walking toward her. Isabella's first instinct was to run, to grab the children and Lena and disappear. But she was 62 years old, and that man had no power over her. Adrian was dead. His empire was dust. Michael was just a man in a park, and she was a woman who'd survived worse than an awkward encounter. He stopped a few feet away, his expression uncertain. "Isabella? Isabella Moretti?" She could have denied it, played dumb, but she was done hiding. "I haven't been Isabella in over 30 years, she said calmly. "But yes, it's me." He seemed at a loss. "I thought you were dead. Everyone did. Adrian looked for you for years and never found a trace." "That was the point." Isabella kept her voice level, aware of Lena watching from where she sat with the children. "I needed to disappear completely." "Why?" The question was so absurd that Isabella almost laughed. Because your brother chose his mistress over his wife and daughter. Because he let me nearly die alone in a hospital. Because he built an empire on cruelty and expected me to smile and be grateful for the scraps of attention he threw my way. Michael nodded slowly. I know he wasn't a good husband, or a good man, really. I tried to talk to him once, after you disappeared, asked him if he'd driven you away. He told me to mind my own business. That sounds like Adrian. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For whatever he put you through, and I'm glad you survived him. Michael glanced at Lena and the children. You built a good life, it looks like. I built the life I deserved. The one Adrian never would have let me have. He died angry, Michael said quietly, bitter and alone. I visited him once in prison, and all he could talk about was how you'd betrayed him, how you'd destroyed everything he'd built. He never understood that he'd destroyed it himself. Good, Isabella said. I hope he died knowing exactly what he'd lost. I hope he spent every day of those years understanding that choosing power over love cost him everything that mattered. Michael looked at her for a long moment. You're different than I remember. Stronger. I was always strong, I just didn't know it yet. Isabella smiled slightly. Survival has a way of teaching you who you really are. Will you tell me your name, your new name? She considered it, then decided there was no harm. Sarah Mitchell, Professor Sarah Mitchell, retired. It suits you. He started to turn away, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Leaving. Protecting your daughter. Building something new. Adrian's world was poison. You were smart to get out before it killed you. I know, Isabella said simply. She watched him walk away, this ghost from a life she'd left behind, and felt nothing but mild curiosity. There was no fear, no anger, no regret. Just a distant acknowledgement that once upon a time she'd been connected to these people, and now she wasn't, and that was exactly how it should be. Lena came over, the children trailing behind her. Who was that? Your uncle, technically, Adrian's brother. Do you want me to It's fine, baby. He's nobody to us. Just someone who knew who I used to be before I became who I am. Lena searched her face. Are you okay? I'm perfect, Isabella said, and meant it completely. They continued their walk, the children running ahead, the autumn sun warm on their faces. Isabella held Lena's hand and felt the weight of 33 years of freedom settle around her like a benediction. She'd done it. Survived the impossible. Built a life from nothing. Raised a daughter who was everything she'd never been allowed to be. Created a legacy of strength and resistance and the kind of love that liberated rather than confined. And she'd outlived him, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Adrian had died bitter and alone, his empire in ruins, his name a synonym for corruption. But Isabella had died and been reborn as Sarah, and then simply become herself. A woman who taught and loved and helped others and built something real from the ashes of what had nearly destroyed her. They walked through the park and out into the city beyond, 4 generations of a story that had started with fear and ended with freedom. The children chased pigeons. Lena talked about her latest research project, and Isabella listened and laughed and felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've fought your battles and won, not through violence or revenge, but through the simple revolutionary act of choosing yourself. The past was behind her. Adrian was dust. His brother was a stranger who'd briefly interrupted her afternoon and then disappeared back into irrelevance. And Isabella, Sarah, whoever she was now, whoever she'd always been beneath the names and the roles and the survival strategies, she was here, present, free, surrounded by the family she'd built through love rather than obligation, walking through a city that had once been her prison and was now just another place she'd visited and would leave again. She'd won. Not dramatically, not through confrontation or final battles or cinematic moments of triumph. She'd won by disappearing and building something better in the shadows, by choosing peace over revenge, by transforming pain into purpose and fear into freedom. She'd won by surviving and then by living, and finally by simply being happy. And that, Isabella thought as they walked toward the setting sun, was the best possible ending. Not revenge, not vindication, not even justice, really. Just happiness. Just freedom. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd taken her life back and used it to build something beautiful. She was 62 years old, and she'd spent more than half her life as Sarah Mitchell. The girl who'd been Isabella Moretti seemed like a character from a story she'd once read, and the woman who'd briefly been Isabella Vance was a ghost she'd successfully exorcised. She was simply herself now, complete and whole and unafraid of the future because she'd already survived the worst and emerged intact. Lena squeezed her hand. The children laughed. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon. And Sarah Mitchell walked forward into the rest of her life, leaving the past where it belonged, behind her, powerless, finally and completely finished. She'd won by letting go, by choosing peace, by building a life so full of love and purpose that revenge became irrelevant and justice became simply the natural consequence of truth. She'd won by becoming someone Adrian could never have imagined, strong, independent, happy, free. And she would spend the rest of her days being exactly that, not in spite of everything she'd survived, but because of it.